In 2003, at 5 years old, I boarded a plane with a man I'd never met. My small hand trembled in his as we stepped onto the aircraft, leaving my mother behind in Sierra Leone. 15 years later, something incredible happened. A reunion that tied together a journey spanning 2 continents, a desperate mother's trust, and a stranger's kindness. This is my story. I was born in Sierra Leone, a small country in West Africa, where the sun burns bright and life can be as fragile as the breeze. My mother, Zainab Hughes, raised me alone, her fierce love a constant in a world of uncertainty. By the time I was 4, we'd migrated to the United States, chasing a better life, better schools, better medicine, better chances. But homesickness gnawed at her. In 2003, she decided we'd return to Sierra Leone for 6 months to visit family, to breathe the air of home again. 4 months into the trip, I fell ill. It started with a fever, then escalated until I couldn't keep food down. The local clinics, with their cracked walls and limited supplies, couldn't help me. My mother watched me waste away, her dark eyes wide with fear. "It was life or death," she told me years later. "I knew you wouldn't survive if you stayed." But she couldn't leave yet. Family matters held her back, threads of duty she couldn't untangle. So, she made a choice no mother should have to. She'd send me back to the US alone. The plan hit a snag. At 5, I could legally travel solo on domestic flights, but an international journey with connections through multiple countries required a chaperone. She had no one to call, no friend or relative on that flight path. Time was slipping away, my condition worsening with every hour. So, she did what desperation demanded. She went to the airport and started asking strangers. I can still picture her that day, though the memory's edges are blurry, her braided hair pulled tight, her voice shaking as she approached person after person. Most turned her down. "I can't take responsibility for a child," they'd say, or "I'm not equipped for that." Who could blame them? Who'd want to shepherd a sick, scared girl across the world? As the clock ticked, she pleaded with a gate agent, who pointed to a man standing alone in the corner, a white man, tall and quiet, staring out the window. His name was Tom Perriello, though we didn't know it then. My mother approached him, clutching my medical papers like a lifeline. "Please," she said, "my daughter needs to get to the States. She's sick. I can't go with her." He hesitated, his face clouded. "I'm not in the right state for this," he told her. "I just lost my grandmother. I'm flying back for her funeral." My mother froze, but before she could turn away, he softened. "But I'll do it," he said. "I'll watch her." She booked me on his flight, scribbling her contact details on a scrap of paper. Then she knelt, kissed my forehead, and handed me over. "Be brave, Maya," she whispered, tears streaking her face. I didn't understand what was happening, just that I was leaving her, my anchor, with this stranger. As we boarded, I looked back to see her silhouette against the glass, watching the plane lift into the sky. "The adrenaline faded," she later wrote in the Huffington Post, "and I thought, oh my God, I just gave my only child to someone I don't know." The journey was a blur of terror and exhaustion. We flew from Freetown to Dakar, then Paris, then Dulles International Airport outside Washington, D.C., hours stretching into a lifetime. I cried most of the way, my wails echoing through the cabin. Tom tried to calm me, his voice low and halting. He even sang to me in Creole, my native tongue, though the words were clumsy, pieced together from some phrasebook or memory. He kept trying, I'd later tell the Huffington Post. That's what I remember, just him trying. The flight attendants took pity on us. After Tom explained, a grieving man suddenly tasked with a sobbing child, they pitched in. They brought us first-class meals, warm blankets, anything to ease the ordeal. I barely ate, too overwhelmed, but their kindness softened the edges of my fear. Tom didn't say much, just held my hand through takeoff and turbulence, his grip steady despite the sorrow etched into his face. When we landed at Dulles, my grandmother waited at the gate, her arms open, her voice calling my name. I ran to her, burying myself in her embrace. Tom handed over my bag, nodded to her, and disappeared into the crowd. My mother joined us a month later, her family matters resolved, and we settled back into life in the US. But the story of the man on the plane lingered. I'd tease her about it as I grew up. "You sent me off with a total stranger, Mom. What were you thinking?" She'd laugh, then grow quiet. "It was risky," she'd admit. but he kept you safe. We wondered about him often, who he was, where he'd gone. The tale became a family legend, retold at gatherings, until it reached my cousin Aisha. She'd moved back to Sierra Leone, and one day, over a crackling phone line, mentioned a coworker who'd told a similar story. A man who'd escorted a sick girl to the US years ago. His name was Tom Perriello, she said. Could that be him? The line cut before we got more, and Aisha and I lost touch soon after. But the name stuck. 15 years passed. I was 20 now, a college student piecing together my past. In 2018, Aisha visited the US, and over coffee, she brought it up again. Did you ever find Tom Perriello? She asked. Who's that? I said, puzzled. She grinned. The guy from the plane. I tracked him down through a colleague. He's some big-shot politician now. My mother and I stared at each other, stunned. We found his email online. He'd worked under the Obama administration, a special envoy in the State Department, and she wrote to him. Dear Tom, she began, you may not remember, but in 2003, you helped my daughter Maya get to the US from Sierra Leone. She was 5, sick, and I was desperate. I've never forgotten your kindness. She detailed the journey, apologized if she'd gotten the wrong person, and hit send. Days later, he replied, Zainab, I remember everything, he wrote. Maya's cries, the Creole songs I butchered, the flight attendants who saved us. I told my family about her for years. I'm so glad she's well. He explained how surreal it had been. Fresh from his grandmother's death, approached by a frantic mother, thrust into a role he hadn't expected. It was like a movie, he told the media later. Dramatic, chaotic, but seeing her run to her grandmother made it worth it. I took to Twitter that night. My mom's been searching for this man for 15 years. We never knew his name. She emailed him, and he remembered everything. Said he never forgot me or the songs he sang in Creole. He's Tom Perriello. The tweet went viral, thousands moved by this improbable thread of fate. Tom replied, so pleased you're shining bright, Maya. We vowed to meet, to close the circle. Months later, we did. In a DC cafe, I shook his hand. Older now, but with the same quiet strength, then hugged him tight. My mother cried as she thanked him, her voice breaking. You gave me my daughter back, she said. He smiled, a little sheepish. I just held her hand, he replied. She was the brave one. Looking back, I know I wouldn't be here without him, a stranger who became a lifeline. It's a story of trust, of risk, of humanity bridging oceans and years. And now, it's complete.